the appearance that we throw up is actually bullshit, and that we actually should be taking a good hard look at what our reality is, because the stakes are high.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking, generations of children, like, look at the kids. If you're not
Mhm.
going to do it for you, do it for your kids.
Welcome to Hard Ground. Welcome to Hard Ground.
Actually, this is really exciting because Emma reached out to me just wanting to help, which was so incredible. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Emma. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Mm.
Emma Wallace is the Communications Officer for the Rural Financial Counselling Service, Northern Region. And she's a former small business financial counsellor as well. She works to raise awareness of the vital support that RFC provides to farming families, particularly around succession planning, which is, something we love to talk about on this show. She
Absolutely.
also co-created the Nurturing Conversation, which is really exciting, actually, Em, and I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on that later on. And so welcome again to the show, and thank you very much for reaching out and, just being so willing to have these conversations with us today.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks, Josh, for having me. It's really great that you'd have me on and fly the flag for all financial counsellors everywhere as well, that are doing a great job around the country, and for our organisation in New South Wales year in, year out, season to season, with farmers. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point too. Actually, it's like it's such a vital piece of the industry, and it's a technical part of the industry. It's not always an easy thing to navigate, and situations would tend to be different. I can imagine. Emma, what's you sort of see? I suppose you sort of ranged across many different sizes and shapes and all kinds.
Absolutely. And that's the whole nature of it, is that just like in any industry, but particularly farmers, no two farmers are the same. So whether you're talking about succession planning or we're talking about any of the other impacts that farmers have on their business and the flow-ons that they have to the community, every person and every client that we deal with is unique. And we help them explore their own particular unique circumstances, come out with the goals that they particularly want to have. And in succession planning, especially if we're talking about that, it is so varied and so niche and so individual, family to family. So there's a lot of threads that unite. There's a lot of issues that revolve and keep coming around, but the nuances within every family is completely individual. So that's the great thing about getting to know people on a one-to-one basis, is that we can find out what that is and then help them achieve what they want in their life.
Yeah. So it's like which brings us to, I suppose, the series name, which is the F word in business, that we're trying to cover for this round. And so it really leans into that sort of, well, pretty emotionally high strung zone with a lot of attachments to money and the security and the certainty and the capacity to be able to make moves and decisions and really devise what you can and can't do. What sort of what kind of, I suppose, like, what's the general kind of conversation type, or I suppose that you sort of have with certain families? Like, where do you usually find families at the time they sort of reach out?
Look, it can come at every stage of the game. I guess the thing with money, and you brought that up specifically, and it's something that here at RFCS, that it's money is a taboo topic at the best of times, but particularly in the bush, talking about money, having those open conversations, whether it's about your money in general or your succession or any of those, it's off the table. It's hard enough to bring it to the table. Your video particularly highlighting it, the coffee in the face, succession recession, it's hard enough to talk about it at your own table, let alone out in the open in front of other people. And that's what makes having those discussions a whole heap harder, but also for people to seek out help when they're in a position that they don't know what to do. So we come across people from all sorts of entry points, whether that be from word of mouth, which is generally the biggest way that we come in contact with clients, from one person having a great experience and coming back in, but it can be at different events that we hold. It can be in a whole different range, but at different life cycles of where they're at in their situation. Some are at crisis and some are really proactive, and we're hoping to shift more over to the proactive side than the waiting till it's at crisis or it's left too late to be able to do what people really need to do.
Mm.
It's a tough one. It's tricky. It's always taboo. And we're trying to destigmatize that. And you guys are doing that as well, which is why, it's so good to put it out there to remove that stigma around talking about it and seeking help.
Yeah, I mean, in your line of work, what would you say is the most, from like a daily basis? What's a common conversation that you would have, or how do you broach starting that awkward conversation about money with farming families?
Well, I think sometimes we'll have, farming families reach out where they've hit a grind point where they've, negotiating or they've come to a place where they're not making any ground. Other times we'll have people reach out to us that are in other kinds of trouble. And then the discussion opens up. And as we earn trust with them over time, then that's when they have that a willingness to talk about some of the other issues, and we can then probe as well as to where we think that they might need to look at. Now, succession planning is one part of overall business planning. So because we look at the whole gamut holistically with people, sometimes that's something that needs to be covered up front, and that's the primary reason that they're connecting with us. Other times we can see that that's something that they're going to need to deal with. So we approach them to say, well, have you thought about this? It really comes down to the individual, but we do see where some really nitty gritty times is particularly when people are looking at coming up to retirement, we'll have people reach out, and often that's probably too late, isn't it? Like in
Yeah.
a lot of instances, because it takes a long time to actually go through all the processes. But sometimes there's real technical things, which we don't need to get into, but those differences on tax and other implications that if you're about to step back, it's too late to have the discussion. But that's when we pick it up. So we pick up the ball wherever it is and we run from there.
So Emma, why are you in the business that you're in? Like, why this specific area? What's the story behind how you got here?
Well, for me personally, I joined the organisation as a result of the flood in northern New South Wales in 2022. So I came on board as a small business financial counsellor then, and then I transitioned to the role of communications officer over time. All of our RFCs come in through a different pathway. Mine was a real mission for helping community, for small business advocacy, and I think that's another space where agriculture gets left out of these small business conversations because the majority of farms are small businesses, but they are always seen as separate to the small business community. So for me, that was another need to be able to bridge that gap to help my local community in the wake of that enormous disaster in 22, and then to be able to take the skills that I had then from previous careers into showing that and sharing what RFCs do long term and bringing attention to the great work that we do for our organisation.
So are you off the land yourself, Emma?
I am.
Family farm?
So
What was that look like?
So in northern New South Wales, we lived on a mixed farming agricultural setup. So where we had raising potty farms on milkers, different kinds of livestock and a little bit of cropping. My dad was also then contractor driver for a lot of different farms in the area. So we had a few different things in my mixed bag. But I've always lived in this region and always had a love for agriculture and the land as well. So this was a role that enabled me to bring some of that experience into it as well.
So Emma, what's a bit of your background? Where are you from?
Well, I'm a Northern Rivers, New South Wales girl, not born, but raised all my life. And I came into working with the Rural Financial Counselling Service after the 2022 massive flood catastrophe. People would probably be familiar with Lismore particularly, but across the whole Northern Rivers. So I joined after a long history of having business advocacy and working with the community to join the RFCS service as a small business financial counsellor then.
So you just
Uh,
saw, so you just saw there was a like when that was all happening, it drew you more into the problems that you were sort of seeing and facing. You saw the families really what they were undergoing and things like that. Tell us a little bit about that experience, that time.
Absolutely. Well, I was already working in a disaster preparedness program, but preparedness goes out of the window when it's in the thick of what's happening. And when you're seeing your community around you, you would have seen the golden arches of the McDonald's signs here in Lismore up to the top underwater. My own family experienced flooding, being rescued off the roof of their house with the boats with the Tinny Army that was here in Lismore. It was a real opportunity to be able to give back to my community, particularly in a meaningful way that was going to connect them with concrete supports to be able to access funding, access support, come together as a community and holistically access mental health services as well. In working in that program, once that came to a conclusion, I then was transferred across with my other career skills to be able to be the communications officer for RFCS NR, and the 15 counsellors that are across across the northern region, the top third of the state, that help everyone from Moree down to the Greater Sydney Basin up through Singleton. We all have that real inbuilt want and need within our local communities to actually help the people that we live with, that we've grown up with, and that we can see thrive in the best way and give back to the communities.
It's insane that time. Like I just remember the footage and stuff like that. You were saying like the McDonald's sign was basically like totally underwater. Did you just say that your father was pulled off the roof?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and look, it's not a unique story here in Lismore. The RFCS office here in the middle of town is on the first floor, and it was halfway up the walls in this office that I'm talking to you now in. So that poster behind would have been right under water on the first floor. It's not unique, and but that's when the best of the community comes together in those worst times. And that's particularly within the agriculture sector. Mates help mates. That's what you do.
100%.
And it brings out that best in people to be able to, band together. And initially it's grassroots, and then it becomes, more structured with things like access to grant supports and other mechanisms that we help with. But we're all members of the communities that we work in, which is what makes our work so meaningful and real. We do it from the heart. It's not another government agency. We're not government, and we're here in our towns helping our mates and our neighbours throughout the year to stay on the land doing what they love.
Actually, I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that, Emma, because as we were getting to know each other, you were explaining to me that this is actually, a service that farmers can access for free. And I was genuinely blown away, especially with anything with succession. I think one of the biggest reservations farming families have is the price tag that's usually attached to it. And so, yeah, if you just could you just explain a little bit more as to how you guys are able to give that service for free to farming families? And then, just talk a little bit more about what is available in the succession area for those families.
So for the Rural Financial Counselling Service is 100% free. It's impartial, which is really critical as well, and confidential. And we're able to do that because we are funded by both the Australian and the New South Wales governments. However, being independent, we can really take a step back, and we're not connected to any other financial institutions or any other private consultancies. So there's no fees, there's no uh, commissions or kickbacks anywhere. And in the succession space, you're quite right, Steph, that sometimes prohibitive price tag on going and consulting with an expert is what stops people from reaching out. We're non-advisory, so we can't tell you what to do, but we can help you explore the options. And then there will be instances where you still may need to engage for the fine points or the contract details or the signing off an accountant or a legal professional, or for a smaller portion, a paid succession consultant. But we can help you facilitate the family meetings, look at all of the different things that are on the table available to you, and also challenge sometimes people's thinking or what they've thought of is roadblocks or the end of the road. Challenge them to go, well, there could be other solutions. What else can you look at? Here are things you mightn't have thought of. So we're able to do that season to season, year in, year out, 100% free. And that's one of the incredible things that's available around the country to farmers, no matter where you're in. So there's 10 different service providers around Australia that can provide that for you wherever you happen to live. So it's not just you.
It's a pretty incredible. That's fantastic news for a lot of people. I think that are even just trying to break into that as an option. Tell me, one of the things you said before was that you find a lot of people that are in crisis, and you're trying to shift people from this place of crisis across to the place of, well, I suppose, order or some semblance of they're moving and they're thriving, they're
In the
able to
right direction.
in the right direction, right? But tell me, what does crisis look like? Because some of us don't necessarily know what crisis is inside of their own business until it's too late. So when you find people in this place of crisis, what does that actually give us an
Look
example
like.
of what that looks like?
Well, I mean, obviously, financial crisis can lead to, as we know, and that's another big topic that we won't delve probably too deep into today, but farmer mental health are often run side by side. So there can be trigger points there that are pointing to that crisis. Sometimes it can be cash flow issues, debt mediation, which is something that we also assist with. But when it comes to succession and crisis, I think the biggest thing that we see on a regular basis is communication breakdown within families. And crisis takes the point of people being at loggerheads, family fallouts. It looks at, younger generations butting heads with older generations and neither wanting to move because they're not really understanding one another. It's about expectations from one side to the other. It's older generations are being in a position where they're being now when we say crisis, that might look like I'm no longer being able to keep up with the tasks of managing the farm, but not wanting to relinquish reins on the farm. It can also be things like I need to stay in the farm here because we haven't planned early enough to be able to accommodate keeping the farm and providing for me to be able to move off farm to allow the next generation to take over. So that can cause huge things with aged care and all sorts of things, and people getting stuck in their homes and not being able to manage. So crisis can look like a lot of different things in this. But I think the crux of it all is that it's often because when it's been left too late to look at it.
What age? What age do you find like predominantly reach out to you? What's the age bracket?
Generally, proactively reaching out to us, we're looking at that older age bracket. So you're sort of looking at least 55 and plus. We have clients that are even up until their 80s are coming into contact with us for the first time when, like you said, they're at crisis and we don't know what to do now, or they've got pension eligibility issues or farm household allowance issues, which are other things that can all make it more complicated. What we're trying to do, though, is really get the message across that it's the younger generations in partnership with the older generations that need to be reaching out so that all of these things might not necessarily be coming into effect, but that they're building the kind of businesses that are going to support everybody and their needs from those properties.
Yeah, I think one of the themes that we keep seeing in these discussions that we're having with lots of different people in the industry is the timing is everything, and starting young is just imperative. The message over and over and over again is don't be afraid of it. Start the conversation now, and recognize too that it's not a one-stop shop and that's done and dusted and then we all walk away doing XYZ. It's a process that can take 10, 15, 20 years. And if you start it early, that process doesn't have to be this big, ugly, scary, horrible thing. It actually gets to be a really positive outcome for all those involved because, like we were learning last week, that when everyone is younger, and there's just less complications. There's, potentially less people in the mix. There's people who are in their right mind still, who are not dealing with maybe a sickness or getting elderly
Well,
or
they're not full
all
of
these different
they're not
things.
full of as many stories or as set in their ways. Although there's plenty of stubborn, hard-nosed blokes out there as well, and ladies. But I mean, like I think that's a good point. Is that don't be like for our generation. We're thinking about so many other things, and I think there's also stories that we ought to to already know this stuff, or we already ought to have this under control. Nobody likes to, face the fact that actually we're not as flush as we'd like to be, and the appearance that we throw up is actually bullshit, and that we actually should be taking a good hard look at what our reality is, because the stakes are high.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking, generations of children, like, look at the kids. If you're not
Mhm.
going to do it for you, do it for your kids. The up and coming generation is what we're sort of addressing here in the long run. Do you want to be tagged along and be caught in the same kind of financial schism that so many of our generation find themselves, where we're locked down into a family enterprise that has, the one boot fits all approach and the one
Mhm.
for everybody? Like, we've got stories here we're reading about just the other day, which was, about basically they are not. I mean, this is an older generational farm, and the families, and I think there's like
Which family?
three generations still on the farm.
Yeah, the matriarch was in her 90s, still calling the shot, to the parents who were in their 60s and still, overseeing them, like financial abuse, really, still asking them why was their grocery bill what it was? Why would the husband need his Land Cruiser fixed? Actually, that's a good question for you, Emma, too,
Mhm.
is I speak a lot to women who marry into farming families.
I speak to a lot of guys that marry these other women that come into these family farms.
And how are they
The
faring?
Oh,
outlaws.
mate, it's hard. They're all bastards.
Are they
I
all
don't know if you
right?
watch the statistics, but we won't go much into it.
Well, uh, and like I don't want to say it in this really drastic way, but if I was to put a blanket, and I know I am generalizing, but from what a lot of women have told me,
Dangerous.
I would say it borders on financial abuse. Some of the situations that these women are in, have you experienced that, and do you see that a bit?
Oh, look, yes, absolutely. We do see that. And I think there's definitely a very serious column that a lot of those things go into. One of the reasons actually that we ran the workshop series that we did and created Nurturing the Conversation was to highlight some of those red flags of where these things can happen. But on a little bit of a more lighthearted note, it's funny, there's the he said thing here. And I know that the daughter-in-laws get a bad rap, but just to share something, when we go out and we do workshops with people, particularly with women, and there was a couple where we survey anonymously, but everyone can see the answers in the room, what the biggest hurdle or the biggest stumbling block in them tackling the succession issue is actually comes up as the husband, not the daughter-in-law or the outlaw or the marry-in person that's there that has a certain idea about the way things need to happen. That is actually the hardest obstacle to overcome. But
Yeah.
all things said, you're quite right, Steph, that yes, financial abuse or bordering on that, or what we now know as that, which was never sort of questioned as such in generations gone by, is definitely something that it does hinge on a lot of times. And our RCs are trained to sort of look at that as well, and to recognise those things, and to gently draw attention to some of those factors. Elder abuse is another thing that we do see a lot of, sadly, where there's a lot of bullying of the older generation, especially when mum's left by herself and she's got
Yeah.
maybe a couple of kids who have some really strong ideas on what mum should be able to put up with. And she's worked her whole life on that property. She knows it inside out, and they decide, we know better than you, or you can just be good with being on the pension so we can take this. So there's a lot of different nuances and a lot of red flag areas, but we're hoping that, through education, through talking to people, but also for shining light on some of those issues, it's actually going to make it so that these things aren't happening as much.
Actually, can I ask you just to name a few of those red flags for women who do marry into the farming family, and for men too, I suppose, if you
I think
if
I'd be
you marry
careful,
into it?
because
I
you've got. I know there's definitely women in situations, but I think you also got to recognise that there are a lot of younger generations, which are our audience here, and they come together believing that they're going to enter into something that's going to flourish in a certain
Yeah,
way,
totally. I mean
and they
couples
both
as
they
well.
get caught in
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
for
did
sure.
say I was blanketing. It's
Mm.
just in my inbox, that's what I get a
Yeah, that's
lot of.
predominant
A lot
female.
of our followers are female,
Mm.
and they've married into the farm. Things like, just off the top of my head, not not being able to choose the washing machine that they feel they need because their mother-in-law didn't have the same washing machine, and so they're not allowed to have, one that's better than that.
Absolutely. I think some of the red flags are, primarily, and it's the one that gets called out the most, is having a seat at the table. That's the biggest thing initially, is that your decisions or your viewpoints don't even get voiced, or an opportunity to be voiced, for them to be able to even check the validity of what they've got to say. Not having a seat at the table is a big red flag. We also see that the dismissal of knowledge as well, that's a red flag. We're talking, 40% of people that we sometimes get out and about with, particularly in women's groups, when they've got the freedom to be able to express that in a safe space, say that their knowledge gets dismissed, or they're not empowered to step up into leadership roles within the business. And that's a family dynamic as well. So that can be a matriarch dynamic from the mother-in-law. It can be from the OG family or the grandfather family. There's a couple of big ones. Their decisions and their input only being relegated to certain areas of the life, and you said there, use the example of a washing machine. That's probably sometimes one of the areas that they might allow an outlaw to have some autonomy over, but not to more business sided decisions, which that's all really big red flags if that's happening to you. And also that internal fear of just even speaking up. And you highlight it well with humor with the videos that you create on some of those situations, which is great because it allows us to sort of take a bit of the sweat out of that conversation. But it's pretty hard on to the point where you've got to change tack really quickly, because that's about to erupt if you keep going down those lines. And it might not be, really overt, horrible things that are happening. It can just even be completely being frozen out. And on properties where you are facing isolation to begin with, further isolation within the family can be excruciatingly detrimental to people, not only in their financial situation, but their mental health as well. You're out on a farm on your own, and then you're isolated within that family again. It can be a very, very lonely place.
You're sort of referring to the couple in general, the children of the situation maybe being promised a certain thing. Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
so it's like there's that whole element where you do have like couples, these younger generations that are stepping into this, because like
Yeah.
you're thinking about
Yeah.
like the approach to this conversation. We have a whole this is the intergenerational family farm. This is the F
Mhm.
business, right? So um a young couple, they come back to the farm, or he's already on the farm, or whatever, or she's on the farm, get married, and they have a very loose understanding, or a trusting understanding of how
Yeah.
they think that the farming will go. Okay. It's usually handshake, sort of a gig. Maybe he's done nothing else but be on the farm. She's probably come in with a different career choice or type that may not necessarily add value to the farm in as traditional a sense, and they start a family. Usually in the early stages, it's not such a big deal. You don't need for much, you don't want for much. You basically head down, bum up, and you're building this thing, and you're expanding, and you get into a bit of debt, but you don't worry, you're supported by something that's already been successful. And so you have this success story that that the other generation's basing it off. There's a bit of a plan, and then children come on, and then conversations start to change. Then stakes start to raise, beliefs and value systems start to alter within the greater, call it the father's house, or, the father's house being the grandfather or whatever. And then we start to see the collisions and the sparks starting to fly. That little couple there, that younger couple, they haven't gone to get a financial advisor because we don't have any money. We don't have any money. It's all wrapped up in the asset. I don't take a wage, which is a massive thing that I've seen
Yeah.
for, of course, many
That is huge.
of our generation. Okay, usually the little sons there that have been basically slogging it out, never taken a dollar. Basically, you get your beer, you get your smokes, and you get your fuel, and if you need a car, and everything sort of, it's a homogenized system, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like they're
Absolutely.
just raising raising up the bigger kid. Then all of a sudden you look and you want to be able to have some autonomy of decision making around money, and you can't do it because you don't have actually got any money at all. And everything that you do affects they do. And then when that happens, you've got, well, now we've got a real mess because there's the entitlement and the resentment starts to grow. Far be it from the older generation, they ever wanted anything like that to happen. They just did what they thought was right, but they just didn't really know what the hell they were doing because nobody taught them,
That's
and
so
things were
true.
different back then. And before that, it was different again. It was basically, it was simple. Grow the thing, build the thing, do it. But any thought for the future is not necessarily the thing that's coming up. Plan this
You're quite
young
right.
couple in. So yes, speak on that. Sorry, Emma.
You're quite right there, Josh. And I think this is where what you're highlighting is a fundamental shift that's happening in younger generations of viewing the farm as a business as opposed to your life. And this is a really crucial time in intergenerational farming transfer where younger generations do see the importance of seeing the business as a business, which is separate to your life, whereas older generations historically, that's just been their world. That's their life. It's not a business. And viewing those in two separate ways is why, without looking at mechanisms, having a business plan is so critical to a succession plan being successful, because that will look at all of those issues where it's looking at wages, it's looking at viability, it's looking at the actual business structure and how that works. But because they've got different mindsets and different ways, that does create that clash. And look, at the end of the day, when you've got the best intentions in the world, if you all can't sit down and have that conversation at a table together without it erupting into conflict, then the likelihood that you're going to be able to map out a business plan and then by consequence a succession plan is that much more diminished. So family communication starts early, and it doesn't have to necessarily be about succession or business or farming, but it's having those critical, open family conversations about all sorts of things, transparency about just the money that's in the accounts, transparency about what the assets are worth, what debt loading there is, and everybody having that clear understanding between them before you, and being willing to talk about that we find is really one of the biggest hurdles. Hence why we sort of look at them as two separate issues in a sense. And we run workshops purely based on the communication side of things, and then other ones to work on the mechanisms and the finance and the business side of things, because it's a chicken or an egg, but you can't have one without the other if you really want both sides to work successfully. And you're quite right. There is a lot of foregone wages. There is a lot of expectation. I want to have an input in this business and having your hands tied, but not having an option to go somewhere else. It's not an intentional thing, getting back to what Steph was saying about financial abuse, but it can be the end result is that you're actually stuck there and you're isolated, but you don't have an option to get out because you've put your whole life into something that's coming down the road.
Yeah.
Actually,
Why
that's
has to happen early? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing that you raised there about communication and teaching communication skills. And we were speaking to another guy the other day, and he was just saying a lot of people assume that communication is just something you're born with, to be a good communicator. But that's actually a lie. It is a skill that you can learn. So, Emma, I would ask, do you have just a couple, what's your probably top 2 tips for encouraging communication between families in the farming industry?
Well, we worked closely with Melinda Guest when we worked on our workshops with her tactics framework, and that really clearly steps down some really fundamental skills on that. But I think it's about, first of all, timing and place is one of the really big things about making space and time to have the conversations when you need to have them. And that's why she puts that up the front in that framework. Melinda is an incredible expert on all things communication and relating it back. And I've learned a lot from her as well. I'm a sort of a born communicator, and some people are, but it isn't something that's automatic.
To clarify, do you mean, making sure that no one feels like they're in a rush to go off and do another job.
Absolutely. Giving things actual time and space. If it is at the breakfast table in the morning before everybody's about to rush off and do something. So actually booking in a time that everybody's willing to prioritize that and put those things on the agenda is a really, really helpful, easy step that you can create from early on in the piece. So when you're raising kids yourself, making that a habit in your own family to set aside time to talk about the things that matter, then that becomes ingrained in what you actually do in your life. Then as the actual issues get more complex and more nitty gritty or turn to the money, the side of the business side of things, not just understanding how to go out and drive the tractor or collect the eggs or whatever it happens to be, that the kids then are well in the habit of doing that. And we can't retrograde that, obviously.
No, we're sitting
But
here laughing at ourselves as that, like, yeah, we're seeing these things in our own family set up, thinking, oh, yes, that is a good idea.
yeah,
Well,
because it's
there's a
just
morning.
you're on autopilot.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing, sorry to interrupt, Josh, the thing is that I guess, and this is not just succession planning, but business planning in general, is that the farm tasks are so heavily weighted as the more important tasks, whereas the actual business and the driver underneath it and your cash flow and your preparation and your contingency and risk planning and all of those things in this modern day are just as critical, if not more so than the farmhold tasks, because you can get someone in ideally or ultimately sometimes to do some of those tasks, but you can't get someone to steer your ship in the direction you want it to with the same passion and love that you have for your farm. You can again hire a professional, but they don't live that the way you do, and they're not going to necessarily steer it the way you want it to be steered. So it's about prioritizing those things and making that time to talk about it and have everybody willing to do that. And if not, then addressing why are we not prepared to do that? And then you can go from there and work outwards from there onto what the other stumbling blocks are. But initially making it a priority and regularly, not just once a year and not at Christmas when everybody comes together, because it's the most terrible time to talk about stuff. Not at Christmas, but you'd be surprised. That's what so many people do. We've had farmers that are clients. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, because you think everyone's together now. Like,
Everyone's
geographically,
together.
everyone's come together. So the idea of bringing people, especially people from outside of the
The
farm.
best time to talk shop.
Oh,
Let's just talk shop.
absolutely.
Eggnog.
And I think
Get a few eggnogs.
there's this constant paddling, always paddling with farming. Always. There is always something to do. So the idea of stopping the duckies' little feet from going crazy under the water is just sacrilege. Like, to suggest that is like, we cannot stop paddling. We will not stop paddling for anything, not even to have a conversation about where the duck is headed,
It
Well, the
can be a deliberate avoided strategy too sometimes. It's funny when we have events or we have things where we have 30 registrants, 40 registrants that they're going to come to a workshop. And if it rains, we'll be lucky because we'll generally get husbands and wives come together. But you get that sunny day and the number of blokes that'll go, can't do that thing anymore. Going to go out and do my tractor do or whatever it is that task is, because it's easy to say, I'm too busy to look at that, because it sometimes dredges up some difficult things to have to look at. And like you said before about admitting that there might be things I didn't have ship shape or all tightened up. And I have to admit that when we look at it. And I guess the other thing is mistakes are not failures. Mistakes are learning. And so if we can try and remove the stigma of that, if you've made a mistake, that's something that you need to be ashamed of. It's not. It's a learning curve. You can take that on. You can actually talk about it more and go, okay, well, that didn't work. We planted this in that paddock and it didn't work. Why not? What are we going to do differently? Rather than, you're off the job now, or we're going to go and give that to your brother instead because he's better at it than you. No, that's your chance to upskill. And if we can reframe our thinking like that, go a long way.
I think there's a real the numbers don't lie. Got to get the facts and separate them away from the feelings inside this conversation. Across
Facts beat fear every time.
yeah, exactly. So you've got you've got a, basically you've got a generation up and coming. They've learned under a generation that keep everything up here for the most part. And it's, do you learn the habits of that and keep implementing them and just want to keep this roundabout circle going, knowing that this has not been the most pleasant of experiences in all the world, knowing that a lot of the stuff doesn't seem to work, and just sort of coping and ticking along. This is sort of thing that people need to be aware of. Everybody bloody well does. The cultural industry is not getting easier.
No.
We can fling as many techie git-gats and all sorts of wonderful button presses and all the gizmos in the world at this show. But don't worry, there's a whole nother force that's basically tearing the show down. And it's coming in from all sides. And we're feeling it. We're all feeling it. Part of one of the things you were saying, like the farmer won't get to the workshop. I'm guilty of sin of that, mainly because like there's a lot of things that we should be getting to, we just don't get to because we've got to get to this, because you're a price taker, you're a market taker, you're a time taker as well. You're not the maker. And it's about, okay, but how much are you going to take before you start actually making the way across the things that you can control? When are you going to
Absolutely.
stop believing that it's all out of your control all the time? And sometimes it's time for you to start shifting the thought process that you've got implanted up here from decades of, how it's always been done, and start bringing in fresh ideas and approaches that'll actually shift the way that you leave this machine, this business, because that's what it is. Like you're saying, it's not your life, okay? Like
Identity.
it's not your
It is.
identity. And although, we're one to say, listen, we basically marry our certainty to this gig, okay? And it's not good. It's not good because that just creates more emotion. But, when are we going to start thrusting into the next gear and move this forward holistically and really constructively? So
You 100% hit the nail on the head. And actually, it's funny that you should say that, because that is actually the purpose and the charter of what rural financial counsellors are there to do, is create behavioural change. That is our remit. Create behavioural change, and through that, to be able to create successful and thriving agricultural businesses, farming, fishing, forestry businesses that can continue to support rural communities. But it's the behavioural change, the financial literacy, the nuts and bolts skills that they need to do that, which will pivot around change. And that is the purpose of what rural financial counsellors do, is to help facilitate that change. And we tackle it from all these different avenues and viewpoints, but that is the core essence of what we do. And people, as a human species, are resistant to change. And
Yeah.
so whether you're farmers, no matter what, we see it all the time. It's not just farmers, it's people in general. We are creatures of habit. We like things the way we like them, and our brains are designed to follow those patterns. So we need to be crafty sometimes in how we get around doing that, but empower people through skills and knowledge, and knowing the numbers, the facts, seeing it there in the black and white, having a business plan. It's not all up here. That's the key to it. And then you can actually dissect it, pull it apart, and analyze it. But you need to have it down for everybody to look at first and foremost. Yeah.
Just so wonderful.
so much for that,
Yeah,
Emma.
it's been so amazing talking to you today, Emma. It's really something I really genuinely had no idea was out there for people to access. Yeah, when you first contacted me, I was really shocked that this was a thing, because I had a stigma around it, thinking this is always a paid thing and it costs people a lot of money to get any advice, any help. So the fact that you've been able to come on here today and just elaborate even more on the incredible work that you and your team do, we're so grateful for your time. Thank you.
Look, thank you so much. And I guess that's the other thing too, that free doesn't mean it doesn't have any value. That's the
Yes.
other thing. So I think sometimes that the RFCS around the country get sort of sidelined because it's not of, if it's free, it can't be worth something, but it's there. Go out and use it. And then if you need to engage someone else, but
You
I
do.
really appreciate you having us on, or having me on, and that we can chat about it and hopefully crack these conversations a bit more wide open, get some air on it, and change things for both sides, the older generations and the younger generations. It's a pivotal moment for farming with everything that's going on, if we all really want to make sure it's sustainable into the future.
Leave us with say a final comment that you would leave for the younger up and coming generation of farmers currently on the land coming to this landscape? What would you say to them?
Take on with respect what you've learnt from the past, know your numbers, map it down, and don't be afraid to ask for help. It's not a failing, it's a strength.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Love that.
Got goosebumps.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.